Hello, my name is Justin Bates, and today we're going to talk about Samuel Brannan, including his impact on public institutions and his controversial role in early California's vigilante justice. By way of introduction, Brannan was the leader of a group of Latter-day Saints who traveled aboard the ship Brooklyn and landed in what would become San Francisco in 1846. He became a prominent figure both for his charismatic personality and rapidly expanding portfolio of California real estate and business ventures. While Brannan is often remembered as the herald of the gold rush, he also brought a superior printing press to California, opened a printing shop, started an incredibly influential newspaper that helped unite Californians and market the area to the world, operated a successful store at Sutter's Fort during the gold rush, the first of its kind in the area, by the way, helped fundraise for a public school as well as the rescue of the Donner Party, helped start a fire department, build a railroad, and also championed efforts to produce formal laws for California. Brannan is arguably the best example of a Brooklyn saint who strove to develop the Bay Area with an eye towards future growth. To better understand why Brannan was so successful in laying the foundations for a growing populace, it's helpful to understand what kind of a person he was. One of his contemporaries and fellow San Franciscans, William Davis, described him as liked by everyone who knew him, kind-hearted, confiding, and generous to a fault, and always ready to open his purse for the relief of the needy. Davis further complimented Brannan by saying that there is hardly a man who has done more for the city of San Francisco or the state of California than Samuel Brannan. Regardless of his damaged relationship with early church leader Brigham Young, and perhaps because of it, Brannan doubled down on helping establish the San Francisco Bay Area in numerous ways, including helping to establish public service organizations. He did this not only for his own benefit as a citizen, but for the benefit of the community in which he was heavily invested, both financially and socially. Brannan's ability to promote and help establish fundamental public service organizations was uncanny. In a book published by the Latter-day Saint Church's historian Andrew Jensen regarding prominent Latter-day Saints up to 1901, Jensen notes that there was scarcely an institution of public usefulness in San Francisco that Brannan had not helped to establish. Specifically, he helped create several fundamental public institutions in the Bay Area. For example, most societies depend on some form of a banking system in order to help them transact business, save, and spend. In an effort to meet this need, Brannan, with the help of men named Peter Burnett and Joseph Winans, organized the first chartered commercial bank in California. One historian indicates this bank was founded in 1863, though his source is undocumented. An October 31st, 1857 newspaper advertisement written by Brannan promoting Samuel Brannan's bank seems to establish that the bank was actually founded several years before. Regardless of its date of origin, in his 1857 advertisement promoting the bank, Brannan states that the express purpose thereof was to serve, among others, farmers, miners, and mechanics. As admirable as that sounds, Brannan was certainly also motivated by a desire to store his rapidly expanding wealth in a secure location. Given his successful mining operations and merchandising businesses, as well as an ever-increasing portfolio of real estate, Brannan came to not only be the richest man in the state, but also held the distinction of being California's first millionaire. In addition to his generous nature and love for California, his seemingly unlimited supply of ready money may also be why he was able to help fund so many public institutions and causes. Now, on the night of December 23rd, 1849, temporary Swiss resident of San Francisco, Théophile Desroutais, paused to admire the beauty of what would come to be called Old San Francisco. He described what he saw: a fleet of ships, the finest and sleekest in the world, at anchor. A town grown metaphorically like a mighty oak out of an acorn, a testament to the unstoppable and prolific expansion of a free people. He obviously spoke very highly of the city. When he went to bed that night, he had no idea that he would be jolted awake about 1 o'clock in the morning to numerous and panicked cries of fire. He described what happened next as a horrible and yet spectacular, monstrous, huge inferno that consumed 300 buildings in San Francisco. And perhaps most imaginatively, I love this description, he called it the fire. He described the fire as a giant punch bowl ignited by Satan and continuously stirred by the demons of hell. Despite the best efforts of the town's residents, buildings caught fire one after another until there was little remaining. And as tragic as this event was for the citizens of San Francisco, it was only the beginning. During an 18-month period from December 1849 through June of 1851, 6 major fires ravaged the rising city of San Francisco, Contributing factors included structures made largely of flammable wood and canvas, coastal winds that could rapidly spread the fire, and the occasional arsonist. While they continued to rebuild each time, inspiring the city's 1852 seal centered around a phoenix rising from the ashes, if San Francisco was going to be allowed to continue to grow, something more had to be done to prevent its repeated destruction. This series of tragic fires motivated several of San Francisco's men of wealth and position and high standing, including Sam Brannan, to found what appears to have been the city's first official fire department in 1850 or 1851. These fires, were they to have continued without an appropriate response, would have threatened the assets and enterprises of these wealthy men trying to develop San Francisco. Perhaps what affords this group the distinction as the first official department of San Francisco was that they actually had one of those rare fire engines, probably the first in San Francisco, which they had recently acquired and donated to the city thanks to the generosity of these wealthy businessmen and fellow volunteer fireman William Howard. A contemporary San Franciscan, previously referred to, William Davis, described this new acquisition from Boston as a first-class engine that was worked by hand. As one might expect, Sam Brannan was among these gentlemen and a contributor to the project, but more than just a ceremonial position. When there was a fire, these gentlemen, supplemented by other volunteers, appeared in their firemen's caps and uniforms and worked the fire engine. While he was not describing this exact group of firemen, Derutte's description of San Francisco firemen during the Inferno that he witnessed gives a good idea of their devotion to the protection and ongoing growth of their city. He says, "A company of firemen exceedingly well organized, made up of volunteers from all social classes, devote themselves selflessly and with great courage to the saving of their city. And when water is lacking, they battle the enemy with powder, axe, and hook." Close quote. If not for the devotion and funding of the Brooklyn Saints' original leader, Sam Brannan, coupled with the contributions of other dedicated firemen and philanthropists in San Francisco, the city's repeated razing may have discouraged or at least decelerated additional growth. With the rapid influx of young, often unattached treasure hunters to California during the gold rush that began in 1848, law enforcement became a definite concern in the Bay Area. Historian Paul Bailey, who admittedly has a flair for the dramatic, described the group of migrants as a stream of thieves, murderers, and wantons lured by that magic word gold, and concluded that their arrival had made a hell sink of San Francisco. While this may have been an exaggerated depiction of the situation, there was clearly a law enforcement issue in San Francisco around 1850. For example, in the summer of 1849, shortly after the discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill, a group of tent-dwelling treasure hunters began to crop up around the Bay Area. On at least one occasion, this band of ruffians, as they were called, assaulted several citizens. These hounds, as they called themselves, were a clear threat to the security of the area and needed to be dealt with if the city were to thrive. Once again, Brannan would play a pivotal, though controversial, role in the development of a public solution to this problem. He rallied the community, organized armed nightly patrols, and according to one who was part of the patrols, Brannan did good work, resulting in the arrest and imprisonment of multiple breakers of the peace. This and other circumstances necessitating law enforcement would eventually lead Brannan to helping establish a more formal and questionable law enforcement organization in San Francisco. One historian wrote that despite his reputation as a notorious hothead, Brannan became a founding member and first president of the Committee of Vigilance, tasked with reining in the riotous and unlawful acts of people in San Francisco. In fact, the group was organized in Brannan's office, and much of the immediate success of the committee was due to his fearless initiative. He's credited with that. Though his hasty advocacy towards summary punishment, close quote, got him into trouble over time. For example, on February 19, 1851, a prominent San Francisco merchant named C.J. Jansen was assaulted and robbed while in his store. One of the men taken into custody was believed to be a criminal named James Stewart, popularly known as, quote, the murderer of Moore. The man in custody was, in fact, not Stewart. He was a respectable British subject named Thomas Purdue. While Purdue did bear a striking resemblance to Stewart in complexion, stature, and even a scar he had on his right cheek, Purdue was not the guilty party. While he was ultimately overruled and Purdue acquitted, Brannan had hastily advocated for immediate execution, which, if it had gone through, would have led to the death of an innocent man. On another occasion, the committee sought to capture and execute a suspect already in police custody because they believed the man would not receive the appropriate sentence in the hands of the courts. Like others in San Francisco, including a Colonel Stevenson, who in 1851 advocated that all law-loving citizens take into their own hands the administration of justice. That seems like a recipe for disaster. Brannan apparently felt that the ends justified the means when it came to preserving public safety. While there were some subjective reports regarding a decrease in violence after the Jansen affair and the Vigilante Committee, there is nothing concrete to support this assertion. Though Brannan's vigilante justice organization sought to avenge wrongdoing and prevent lawlessness, perhaps its greatest contribution to the future development of San Francisco was in demonstrating early on that vigilante justice was not only dangerous, but often ineffective. Their increasingly radical behaviors helped to motivate San Franciscan citizens and lawmakers into establishing a more judicial and regulated form of law enforcement going forward. While Brannan's methods were debatable, the Committee of Vigilance did address some early public safety concerns during the rapid growth of the Bay Area in the mid-1800s, and ultimately helped incentivize an improved justice system going forward. But as with any argument, it is important to address any potential counter-arguments. For example, one might reasonably argue that Sam Brannan's extra-legal activities with the Committee of Vigilance in the early days of San Francisco did more harm than they did good. In response to this concern, Brannan's actions should be contextualized in an era when community violence was not only common but condoned as part of the then existing American tradition of extra-legal vigilantism. While this does not justify his actions, it helps to contextualize them so they can be understood. Furthermore, there is ample evidence outside of this unique situation where Brannan was compliant and committed to working within legal bounds. For example, during the unusual military governorship after the Brooklyn Saints landed in 1846, the people of California were clamoring for formal laws and punishments, especially in the midst of the gold rush when literally tens of thousands of miners, not all of whom were law-abiding folk, flooded into California. The residents proactively sought governance and law enforcement from the United States. Brannan's newspaper was not only instrumental in voicing these concerns to the U.S. military leaders over California, but was nearly the official printer of the territory's interim law book. When the U.S. took control of California in 1846, they inherited an area without strict laws, and where many public offices were vacant. Since it was under military occupation and not yet an official state of the Union, the U.S. laws did not necessarily apply and were not in all cases practically applicable. For example, some U.S. punishments for crimes then committed in California required incarceration in a state prison, but they didn't have a state prison. They weren't even a state. While the military governor Richard B. Mason was sympathetic to the Californian people's dilemma, he was remarkably ineffective at providing a workable solution to the problem. Not until Sam Brannan wrote a series of editorials in his California Star newspaper did Governor Mason begin to act. Brannan's May 20th, 1847 editorial read in part, quote, "The people of this territory are now awaiting the promised administration of decisive law. They require it, they expect it, and to it they are entitled." Close quote. After over another year of stalling, Governor Mason contracted Brannan to print a volume titled Laws for the Better Government of California, which were going to be printed in English and the Spanish language. These were never published, however, because the treaty was signed in 1848 and U.S. laws and systems were formally implemented. Nevertheless, it's clear that through proper and non-violent channels such as the California Star, the Brooklyn Saints and other Californians sought to be governed by and part of the Union, and that included Sam Brannan. While some historians have painted Brannan as a cautionary tale and an apostate from the Latter-day Saint Church, which discussion is outside of the scope of this presentation, it's clear that he was generally well respected in California and made significant efforts to lay the groundwork for those that would follow after him. Since Brannan and his contemporaries had a commitment to the future growth of the San Francisco Bay Area, rather than give up after a fire or in the face of lawlessness, they chose to rebuild and establish organizations that would, in some cases controversially, allow the city to prosper. Thank you.